I do believe we are live.
Looks like it.
All right.
Hi, everyone.
So, welcome to Coffee Coaching and Callings. We are a live podcast created for coaches, leaders, and helping professionals that are on a mission to lead a successful and heart-centered life. Your hosts today are Laurel Elders and Tabitha Danloe of the Institute for Integrative Intelligence, where it's our mission to to elevate human potential through the art and science of masterful coaching. Today, we're going to be focusing on business success tips with Tabitha, my amazing co-host. She is a life and leadership coach. And our topic for today is the power of your story in your own business success. And Tabitha, I'm really excited to connect with you today about this topic in particular, because as you know, coaches have to market, we have to market ourselves a little differently, and you've really cracked the code pretty well.
Thanks.
Yeah, just notice you gained success in your coaching practice more, typically quicker than we see other coaches. Sometimes it can take a while. And then that learning curve of marketing, I did not have that going in to becoming a coach, and that was big for me. So I know that you've got really like two powerful coaching stories that really empowered your process and who you are. So I'd love to just dive in, and can you share with our audience more about your quit your job and bought a one-way ticket story?
Yeah, everyone loves this story. So really, the story starts at corporate America. After I had spent quite a few years running my Mary Kay business as my part-time college job in my 20s, and did really well with that, and earned a car and became a sales director, and realized I love business, but I needed a switch and a change. So I went to corporate America, which was kind of a reversal of what most people do, especially young in life. And I loved it. I worked at an amazing corporation that treated their people really well and had really awesome dynamic culture. And then we were sold to a big pharma company. And little by little, that culture started to shift and change. And I felt more like a number than a person. And then suddenly my boss passed away. And so through this period, I'd been dealing with so much anxiety, so much stress, trying to find happiness when I had it all. I had the 6-figure corporate job. I had the cool little sports car. I'd bought my first house at 27, and yet I wasn't happy. And after my boss passed away unexpectedly, which really shook my world, I luckily had this trip already planned to Hawaii. And you all know that moment when you have that shift. And so I'm in Hawaii, I'm playing with dolphins, I'm scuba diving, magical time. The stress of the corporate world and the grind had left. And I had a moment to sit and realize I'm not happy. I'm just not happy. And when you have that shift, you can't go back, right? You just can't. And so I was with a few friends at the time. And so I shared this epiphany with them as I was crying and like, no, but I have this world, this job, this life that I crafted very carefully, that I checked all my boxes. This is a scary thing to admit that I don't want this. This isn't making me happy. And I kid you not, the one said, Tabitha, I've been telling you for years you should be a life and business coach. You're so good at business and people. And that's true. She'd been bugging me about it for years. And the other one said, you make pretty good money. If I were you, I'd save up my money and then quit my job and travel. And it was like a freight train hit me. And so I did both of those things just in different times. Mm-hmm. And so the number one trip I'd always wanted to take on my bucket list was to Africa. I'd been obsessed with Africa since I was a kid. I'd studied African dancing and drumming for many years already as an adult. Going on safari was my dream. Experiencing the culture was just so near and dear to my heart. And so I went back to the corporate world and I decided to save some money and travel. And I hired my first coach because I was like, what the heck is this coaching thing that everyone keeps telling me I should do? And why would anyone listen to me? And it happens to be this woman sitting with me today, Laurel, who I hired from a referral of a friend. And I loved coaching. I immediately loved the process, the freedom for me to lead the session, the exploration that we could do together, the safety that she created. And so for the next 6 months, I did coaching and I was working on my fear and my anxiety and the corporate grind. And I was working 16-hour days, 6 days a week for the next 6 months and just stashing money and stashing money. Finally, what made me pull the plug was when they cut our salaries by $40,000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then told us we were supposed to work more. And when I said, well, I'm working 6 days a week, 16-hour days, they're like, we'll do 7 without even blinking. And it was like all my values, all that I'd been, pulling up through my being, through my coaching journey, and really getting more aligned with my authentic self. I was like, I can't do this. And so I decided to do my trip. And a lot of people say, well, what was the why? What really was the why behind going to Africa? You guys ready for this? I wanted to do the thing that scared me the absolute most. As a type 6 on the Enneagram, for those of you who know Enneagram,
The loyalist that can also be loyal to their fears. That's a big deal.
I was real good at that. I was real good at being loyal to my fears. And we're the scaredy cats. I always joke we're the scaredy cats. We make mountains out of molehills for the smallest things, but we're also the lion hearts. We have these huge, courageous leaps of faith moments. So here was my big moment. And I just thought, what's the scariest thing I can possibly do? And that's go to Africa by myself to check off this number one dream on my bucket list that I'd had since I was 5. And so I did it. I quit my corporate job. A month later, I was on a one-way ticket to Africa. And my whole trip was absolutely amazing. It was beautiful. It was hard. There was laughter. There was tears. There was a ton of transformation. Being in a third world country for multiple weeks on end, doing bucket showers and having to appreciate things very differently in my first world American lens. Seeing how beautiful the culture is with family and community and participation, so different from America. Dancing, drumming, getting to do these things that I love so much and study directly, in the roots of these tribes and these different people that I got to spend time with. It was beautiful. And then I wandered over to Southern Africa. So I started in Nigeria. Everyone always wants to know what I did. Nigeria, went to Ivory Coast. Then I went to South Africa to start my safari journey of the leg of the trip. And 4 days later, I went to the hospital for malaria and I almost died.
And I can imagine at that point, you might be thinking, oh my gosh, this calling, this leap of faith. And now,
what was I thinking? And yet this is a pretty important moment because I had a near-death experience, and those really do change you and they really do shape you and they give you a totally different perspective. And I don't think I could be the coach that I am today without that. I know that I couldn't. And so it really is a pivotal part of my journey to confront my fear and then to think that that's the worst thing to go to Africa by myself. This is the scariest thing I'm going to face. And then, just kidding. Nope. You're going to have a near-death experience and do it by myself. My first time hospitalized was in Zanin, South Africa.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Wow. And yet, right. I also had the epiphany that night as I went to bed, not wondering if I'd wake up in the morning, frankly, but had to get really okay with that piece if I were to not wake up. And the realization that I had, actually, it still just sticks so clearly in my brain, is the power of love. Having love with people to give and receive, whether that's family, that's friends, that's your BFF, that's a partner, a spouse, or these beautiful strangers that I've been meeting throughout all of my travels. The love that we share together is the most important thing in the world. So as I reflected on that, it gave me a ton of courage to keep going. And so I did. It would have been really easy to come home. It would have been really easy to give up, but I didn't. I stayed put. I got to recover at a 4-star safari lodge for several weeks after I got out of the hospital. And there's so many amazing stories. This is the short version, guys. Like, but it is. So many beautiful, people and these guardian angels to me just came out of the woodworks to help me navigate these next pieces of my trip, to help me heal, to drive me to doctor's appointments, to make sure I had the best care possible. And so I wandered through South Africa for 8 weeks, then went to Namibia, Botswana, and Zimbabwe, continued to just confront different parts of my fears with myself, confront my limiting beliefs, confront my value systems, and try to really navigate, who am I? What do I want out of this life? What's this stuff that I took on, this role that I took on from society, from my parents, being a woman, and we don't even realize it, right? And so I'm like shedding. This whole trip was all about shedding and deciding who I wanted to be. And when I came back, I had a lot of decisions to make. And that was a really hard reentry. Let me tell you, I was away I was in Africa for 4 months. Then I spent some time in Germany, then the Caribbean, then traveled through the States. So I was traveling for about 5 months total, a little over that, off work for about 7. And I'm so grateful I gave that gift to myself. I hope everyone gets a chance to have a mini sabbatical at some point. If you can, take it. The wisdom that I learned about myself during those 7 months, I mean, I can never, there's no price that I can put on that. It's absolutely priceless. And so when I got back, I had to decide what was next. I'd blown through a lot of savings at this point, needed to make some money. Was talking with this lady, Laurel, and she had started bugging me about being a coach. And some other people were bugging me about being a coach. And I'm like, why would anyone ever listen to me? I really had this belief that I had nothing important to say, despite all this learning I'd had.
Yeah. And quite the opposite.
Yeah. So we're almost to the end of the story, I promise. So I went back to corporate America because when they saw I landed on Facebook, they called me up and they were like, hey, can you come back, but in a different role? And we want to get our culture back and we want to do things the way we used to. And I really loved this company at one time. I loved these people. And so I said, sure, like, let's do it. And it was okay for a little bit. The other thing that happened right as I started this job was my dad unexpectedly died. So if you look at the trajectory of the grief that I also was processing, this wasn't just this exciting, exhilarating time in Africa and traveling. There was a lot of grief. There was a lot of hard things, confronting death in multiple ways, with my boss passing, me almost dying, and then my dad passing. And so that I'm grateful I went back to that corporate job because I could kind of do it on autopilot. And that was a blessing, I realized, to do that while I was grieving. But within a few months, I realized things weren't going to go back to the way they were. They were a big pharma company now. And I was hiding out again. I was hiding out and I was totally confronted again with like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this safe pick when I know better? I've learned these lessons. And so I started looking at some other things as I was still working there. And Laurel was like, well, what about coaching? And what about coaching? And I was even doing consulting work for the coaching school at the time, Institute for Integrative Intelligence, and helping with marketing and different business things. And I was like, nah, why? I can't be a coach. And so I decided to go into insurance for some crazy reason. And I think Laurel did such a good job as a coach to not like laugh in my face or, spit water on me laughing.
Well, and I have to say, for those of you that aren't as familiar with coaching, in coaching, we don't give advice, we don't guide, and we don't consult or advise. So our role is to help somebody find their own unique success formula by going within. And it's a completely unique process that no other profession does. So here I am honoring her truth, and every fiber in my being says, insurance? That doesn't sound like, so yeah, that was fascinating.
And you did so good. Just like holding that space
Mhm.
and not like judging me severely in that moment. And so I'm going to write a book about all this someday. And I'm going to call this chapter My Ego's Final Hurrah, because that's
Right.
what this was. Totally. And so I was going to do the slow roll into insurance because I like to play safe despite my, runaway to Africa on a one-way trip moment. And then as I was literally driving to California to scatter my father's ashes 5 months after he passed was when we could finally get all the family together to do that. My partner at the time called and let me know that his father just unexpectedly passed in his arms. And man, I'm like, this is now 2 years, right? If we actually mark it, this is 2 years of tons of grief and shifts and learning. And I came back from that trip and I immediately quit my job,
Mm.
much to their surprise, much to mine. And I'm like, I just can't. The universe, God, insert your beliefs here, is so clearly slapping me with a 2x4. Like, why am I repeating this? You learn these lessons, Tab, move forward. And so I did, but stupidly into insurance. And so this is the ego's final hurrah. I really thought that this was the thing, guys. I mean, I did my second life savings on it to start this business. I worked for two different companies in a 6-month period that both did full on illegal things. And when I reported them, no one cared. And I just couldn't believe it. Like, it was such a clear not working 6 months. Poor Laurel. At one point, she was like, you might need to go to therapy. I'm like, you might be right. Because I was just up against every brick wall. Like, it was so clear that this was not my path. And my ego was like, I'm going to do it. This is my calling. Yes, yes, yes. And so finally, after the second company, I discovered some illegal things and reported them and no one cared. I threw up my hands and I said, Laurel, I'm not gonna, I don't know what to do. And she was like, well, what about being a coach? And I'm like, I'm not gonna do anything until the universe tells me to. Remember that? I'm like, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna spit until the universe tells me to. I'm gonna like wait for all the signs.
Yep.
But I needed cash. So I did a Facebook post later that day that said, friends, I need money yesterday. I'll cook for you. I'll clean for you. I'll wash your cat. What do you need? Call. Tab. Oh, this is so great. You're so good at business. Can you please help me with like, some marketing? I need to streamline some processes and, really maybe do some hiring, stuff like that. You're just so helpful. Can you do that for me? I'm like, well, sure. Do you need me to clean your house? And he's like, no, that's weird. Why would you ask that? I'm like, I'm sorry. Sorry. And then I got another call. Hey, my friend just started her first business and she's like a little clueless and needs some help. Can you like help her file the LLC and get her structure set up and some systems and some client help? And I'm like, sure. Does she need an assistant? I was already in a networking group for insurance that, by the way, had not given me any referrals, made $0 working through that networking group. And one of the girls approached me and she's like, I've noticed you're pretty good at marketing and business and sales. How about I buy you dinner and I pay you $75 and I just ask you questions for an hour? And I'm like, sure. Do you need me to like wash your dog? So I literally had like 3 clients before Laurel finally very lovingly but firmly said, do you think this is the sign the universe was giving you? And I went, yeah, I think it was. All right. And so I went through certification through the school and it was like the heavens opened up. Oh, and
Yeah.
all these 2 years, 2.5 years at that point of like, tons of joy, tons of adventure, but also tons of sorrow and pain and just lots of obstacles just fell away. And I really can honestly say, I feel like I'm completely living in my life's purpose and calling.
Mm.
And
I definitely second that.
and it's been such a privilege, such a pleasure. And I absolutely wouldn't be the coach without all those moments, including the insurance banging my head against the brick wall moment of my ego finally going, yeah, I'm going to get out of the way and let
Mhm.
your higher self lead.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember having that conversation about the last hurrah and how you're like, if I hadn't done that, I would have second guessed any choice that I had made because I would have questioned why I didn't, try that out. So
Yeah.
it's so fascinating to me.
Yeah, and for those who are not as familiar with your ego, think of that little voice that's in your head that's like, well, who do you think you are? And you should make more money, and you're not as pretty as she is, and you should lose some weight. And meh, 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 meh. And so I tell you what, here's the formula for quieting that voice. Go to Africa, quit your job, try something and fail over and over and over again to where you finally have to learn how to trust yourself or hire a coach. I mean,
Yeah.
you pick what's easier. I wish I'd done it the easy way a little bit more. I mean, I did have a coach. She was helping me a lot, but I I look back on that, I'm like, wow, I really needed to learn it you know, the
Yep.
brutal way.
Yeah. Well,
I had
and your story is such a metaphor for I think business success in general, where we have a calling, we feel called to do something, and it can be scary to listen to your heart. Your heart is saying, I really want to help in this way in the world. And the brain, the ego kicks in and goes, really? You want to do what?
Who do you think
Right.
you are?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And taking that leap and developing, what do they say, developing the wings on the way down, where things fall into place. It doesn't mean it's always easy,
Mm,
right?
no,
But it works out. It
it
works
does.
out.
It does. And I'm so grateful for everything. Like it was such a hard time of my life filled with so much cool things. I have so many cool stories of whitewater rafting in Zimbabwe and, complete with crocodiles and, dancing in these different moments that very few people get to experience and, studying with a chief and meeting a king. And there's so many cool things within that and a lot of difficulty.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
growth.
very
So
precious to me.
you'd
Mhm.
mentioned that your these experiences really impacted who you are as a coach. Can you share a little bit more specifically how your stories have helped you
Yeah,
be a successful coach?
thank you. Yeah, it's so much of our job is to hold space for people, right? And I think that empathy is a huge part of that holding space. And so how many times have someone sit in front of me saying, "I'm really not happy. I have this six-figure corporate
Mhm.
job and I'm not happy." And I'm like, I feel that."
Yeah.
So it helps me really see them, I think, very clearly when we have similar experiences. Um Having my own father pass away and then my partner at the time's father passed, I and I've shared this with Laurel and they're always surprised. I've had at least 5 clients lose fathers.
Mm.
And I talk to other coaches and they're like, that's such a specific, right? It's the
Mhm.
father passing. And it happens usually when I'm already working with these clients. And of course, I often refer to therapy for deeper grief work, and I'm still able to hold space maybe a little differently than other coaches could.
Right.
So there's the direct experiences that it brought me, which are helps with empathy and to help relate to people, but we don't always need that to be a good coach. So the ultimate lesson that it taught me was how to be still with myself.
Mm.
I'll never forget how lucky I was to recover at a 4-star safari lodge after I almost died from malaria. And I was too sick to go on the safari ride. And I had to be supervised because I could kind of like go from my room to the bathroom to eat to sit on my little lawn chair. And so I'll never forget the first moment I learned how to be still. And
Mm.
you think that after a near death experience, you'd be filled with more anxiety, you'd be filled with more fear, since that's what I'd been working on this whole time while I went to Africa. No, it took almost dying to like actually let that go and to appreciate it and hear my heart. Do I still have fear and anxiety sometimes? Yes. I don't usually deal with as much as I used to,
Mm.
or I know how to handle it better. And so that stillness allowed me to listen to my heart. It allowed me to listen to my highest self. And that's what helps me be a really good coach, because it helped me better find other people's hearts and higher self.
Mhm.
The more I got still with myself, the more I could see that in other people, and I could help them find that too. And that
Yeah.
stillness, anything's possible.
It's so fascinating because that's where, our wisdom and our answers are found, and our egos are so loud and they generate so many thoughts that are extra. So when we calm that down, it's really interesting to
Yeah.
see what surfaces.
Yeah. And so many people have never experienced. I mean, many of you
Mhm.
listening might be like, wow, I don't know what it's like to be quiet and still in my head. Because it's usually and I still have those moments.
Mhm.
And I know how to silence that now. I know
Yeah.
how to turn into that stillness. And it's beautiful. I used to be afraid of it.
Mhm.
The ego is loud for a reason.
Mhm.
And so this is where working with a coach, working with someone can help you process why your ego is so loud. How is it protecting you? Because I did have to face a few hard things to get to that still point.
Right. Right.
But once I experienced it, I realized, oh my gosh, it's one of the most beautiful places I'd ever experienced. And
Mhm.
then I could connect deeper with others. I could find them in a different way than I could find people before.
Yeah.
Find their true self, their real self.
Right. Yes. The one that's not the fears and the defense mechanisms and all of that.
Yeah.
Well, I've noticed a direct correlation between um, successful business owners just across the board, not necessarily just in the coaching world. And they have this why that drives them,
Hmm.
right? And how powerful that is. It's almost like the more we're in touch with why we are doing this specific thing, the more we show up confident and eager and excited and inspired. Any
I
thoughts on that?
Yeah. I've been doing vision boards for over a decade now. And so I think about the workshop I teach every year with vision boards, and love vision boards. And when we're going through figuring out what we want on our vision boards and our kind of new goals and vision for the next year, I always spend time on that why, because you're right, it's critical, it's super important. And what I tell everyone is that if your why is not bigger than your fear, you're never going
Mm,
to do it.
love that.
So, the other thing I'd add to why business people are successful is they've had a moment of confronting their ego and their fear. Doesn't have to be the extreme that I shared with you guys,
Mhm.
but um, I've never seen someone jump into success that didn't process their fear of failure, their fear of success, their fear of what ifs, their doubts, their self-image fear. There's so many different ways it shows up. Imposter syndrome is a big one.
Mhm.
And so that why has to outweigh the fear.
Yeah, that is so true. Actually, I'm reflecting on my leap story, how I was in a similar situation working crazy hours. There was a lot of breakdowns in leadership. The company I was working for went through a boycott. I mean, it was big. And so I ended up working so hard. I had a stomach ulcer,
Mm.
and I was a single parent, and I was like, you know what? I'm stressed out, burnt out, and now I have a stomach ulcer. And when I went to my boss, I said, I've got a stomach ulcer. I need to, have more balance. And he said, well, I'm sorry your stomach's hurting, but, and I'm like, and we're done. And we're done. So I quit my job without a savings account as a single mom. And I never suggest people do it this way. Like, it is better to have the savings account and the next steps lined up. But I did learn something about trusting your gut, your heart,
Yeah.
because it shows you the next step if you're willing to listen.
Yeah.
And I never went without, and started to build the coaching practice. I had part-time clients, started to build that up. I even did tiles for a while, just to, like
The
art
fake
and
tiles.
tiles. Yep, you remember that?
Yeah.
So
I
it was
love
just as a balance until I could step out of that journey. But it was just, really fascinating. And that why completely kept me going because I knew like coaching was it.
Mhm.
Coaching was it for me. So whatever business is being called.
Yeah, whatever passion might be,
Yeah, whatever that
kind of
is.
just speaking to you a little bit under the surface there.
Mhm.
You have to listen sometimes.
Yeah. So two really good resources for those if you are in business and you haven't looked at your story and the power of your story and how that's connected to what you're doing. Two resources. The first one, this is a classic, Start with Why by Simon Sinek. This is just classic.
Very
I
classic.
think this is just, a part of everybody that goes into business should read that book. The other one is Discover Your CEO Brand. Now, it is about CEO brand, but Suzanne Bates has an excellent prompt in here where you write out your story and you can connect dots to that and who you are showing up as. It's pretty powerful. So those are two that I highly recommend.
Great.
And any other stories that come to mind, Tabitha? You've got such rich experiences.
I do feel like I've had a lot of interesting moments in my life so far, and I feel grateful for that. And I hope I have a lot more life ahead of me with interesting moments. So there's one that always stands out to me, and it's back when I did Mary Kay as a part-time college student. It was absolutely this woman's story that made me sign up. I was not a girl who loved makeup. I
Mhm.
did not wear any basically at all. I never thought of myself as a girly girl, but I will never forget how vulnerable she chose to share her story in front of this room full of strangers. And it was a very sad story where she was in a very fatal car accident and her daughter passed away, her 4-year-old daughter.
Mm.
And I don't know why she decided to share her full story that day. She didn't always. I found out later as I got to know her that it was very rare that she actually shared the full story. But for whatever reason, she was called in her heart to do that. And I knew I had to be a part of Mary Kay. It was again that moment of like, I have to do this. And my sisters were laughing at me. My mom thought it was a dumb idea. Um, I didn't have any cheerleaders really supporting me. I definitely didn't feel like I had any experience. I wasn't the girly girl. I didn't know what I was doing, but something really called my heart. And I just think, wow, if she hadn't shared her story, if it had been someone else that day, like that might have been really a different part of my life. Mary Kay was a huge part of my life for 4 years. I earned a car. I became a sales director. A huge most of my foundation of business started in Mary Kay.
Wow.
And a lot of people don't think about the business acumen you gain
Mhm.
through such an amazing organization. And Mary Kay really is like they're just one of the leaders culturally, leadership,
Mhm.
business strategy, marketing, you name it. I'm still an avid Mary Kay user today, if you can't tell. And I just, yes. So my life would be so different if I hadn't heard that story. And it
Mm.
really was just this vulnerable passion, this tragedy that happened and that led her to Mary Kay. So this tragedy brought Mary Kay into her life. And it's just so interesting. And so I think of that ripple effect, right? If we are too afraid to share our stories,
Mhm.
what if that person needed to hear it that day? So
Yeah.
I hope we all have the courage to share our stories vulnerably
Mhm.
because you just never know the impact that might make and the invitation you're then giving to your potential new clients
Mhm.
to come work with you.
Absolutely. And I think that, when we share our story, our potential clients can connect with us. Oh, this person's real. They've been through a hardship and they're on the other side of it. And it just helps with that connection too. It's so powerful. So I always recommend with coaches, especially, put your story on your website. Put your story on your website. And let people see why you are so passionate about what you are doing in the world and the work that you're called to do.
Absolutely. And if you really want to be bold, make a video about it.
Ooh, there you go.
Video story on your website.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This was wonderful.
Yes. So we are at time. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We hope that the messages have been a lantern to your path as you expand your success as a coach, leader, or helping professional. You can join the conversation further at integrativeintelligence.global. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.